Okay, I assume we are on and live. Thank you for coming or clicking. My name is Daniel Price. I am a science fiction author and author of Flight of the Silvers, shown here. Not the thinnest book in the world, but I like it. And the sequel, which just came out in July, The Song of the Orphans, also really, really long. But so far the reviews are pretty good, so I'm happy. I live in Gilbert, Arizona, and I've been writing for 13 years. So it's a real pleasure to be able to do this. Thank you very much to Jen and Campus Society for bringing me on board. And let's just get right to the questions. So, sorry, I've never done anything like this before, so I'm still kind of like messing with the format. And, okay, here we go. Oh, good, we already have some questions. First one from Tom. How did you come up with a name for the series, and what is your advice to any budding sci-fi writers out there? Okay, very good questions. The series, I have struggled with a name for the longest time. The main group of characters are called the Silvers, so that was pretty much a no-brainer to include them in the title. But the active verbs, stuff like that, was a little trickier, and I originally was called The String of the Silvers, and my publisher didn't like that very much. They suggested Flight. Actually, I thought that was pretty good. So we went with it. And I have no regrets about that. So to answer your second question, any advice to any budding sci-fi writers out there is only one piece of advice that I give is to never forget to make it a character story. As long as people care about the characters, they will care about all the crazy sci-fi stuff that will happen with it. So that's pretty much, once you start with that, I think you're in good shape. So, sorry, I'm still struggling with this, so I will get better at this as I go along. Second question from Juwan. Goes perfectly with what I just said. How do you think of a character's backstory and how it eventually relates to the overall narrative? Very good question. It's basically, I start with two questions when I think of any characters. What are they like when the story begins, and what will they be like when the story ends? And the fun part is seeing how they grow. So I start from that, and the rest of it it works out itself. So with the Silvers, this story is about 6 people from our world, who survive the apocalypse and end up on a parallel world. And so I've been plotting them for years, trying to imagine what they were like, who they were, how they would relate to each other, and how they would evolve over the course of the series. So that was fun. Sorry, I'm still looking through this. What's the most difficult part about keeping a plot together with time travel involved? Funny thing about that, actually, is my stories involve much more time manipulation than actual time travel. One of the things that I challenged myself to do was to come up with as many different ways to screw with the fabric of time as I could without actually incorporating time travel. So, for instance, there are both machines and people who can manipulate time in different ways. There's a woman who can slow down time and move faster than everyone else around her. There's a girl who gets notes from her future selves. A boy who can see the past and recreate it in the form of sound and light. So I wanted to mess with that more than actual jumping back and forth, but there's still a lot of stuff about parallel worlds that is hard. It can be hard to keep track of, and especially, I think, harder for me. My book has a lot of characters in it, and sometimes you have to really make sure to keep track of where they are at every given moment, emotionally, physically, everything. So that can be a drain. Question from Pav. What inspired you to start writing? Oh, well, as cliche as it sounds, the answer is Star Wars. I saw that as a 6-year-old, and it just, like so many kids of that age, it just blew me away. And the sheer power of the story, and the richness of the world. I think ever since, and even as a kid, I was like kind of writing like cheap Star Wars knockoffs in my head, because it fascinated me so much, and I never stopped doing that. So, what's funny is that my first novel, which came out in 2004, was not sci-fi at all. It was just more about PR and media manipulation. So I took a little detour into real-world fiction before going into the crazy sci-fi stuff. And I see questions now on a different part of the screen. Who is your favorite sci-fi author? Oh, that is tough. It's very, very difficult to pick one. But my first choice, and he never liked to consider himself a sci-fi author, but Kurt Vonnegut was, if you read books like Slaughterhouse-Five, which messes with time more than my books ever do, or The Sirens of Titan, which is essentially a space adventure or misadventure, he had his books had the craziest sci-fi concepts you can possibly imagine, but they were also very character focused, and they were just beautifully written, always a little bit sad, but they always had something to say about the state of humanity. He was just a master of his craft. So if I had to pick one, I'd probably say him, but all the greats have something good to offer. I read Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 as a kid, and it just, the realism of it kind of blew me away. So I like that. And I also grew up on comic books. If you read Flight of the Silvers, you'll see a very strong hint of influence of the X-Men, which I'd been reading since I was like 8 years old. I love those kinds of stories. So, and I love, of course, superpowers, which are always fun to write. My series is chock full of them. So, next one. Do you like audiobooks? I've tried. I have really, really tried. I just cannot. I like looking at the words. But I do love the audiobooks that they made for Flight of the Silvers and Song of the Orphans. The narrator they picked, Rich Orlow, was absolutely fantastic. I mean, he brought the story to life. All the characters who had accents, he did the accents perfectly, and he just gave it a lot of energy. So I did like that. But for me and myself, I would just rather read on ebook. It's just for me, it's a better way to process. And Neil asks, would I narrate my own audiobook? Well, as you can see, I'm not the best public speaker, so I'm probably not the best choice for that. But if given the opportunity, if I had some training and a whole lot of lozenges, then yeah, I'd give it a shot. Definitely. Jen asks, do you do a lot of research on time travel to write about time travel? Yes, actually. I did a lot of research into fancy theories about time. I read some books by Brian Greene, who's a physicist who's very good at breaking down complex concepts for the not so scientifically minded, and a bunch of other people actually did a good job just giving me a better concept to wrap myself around, just different theories about how time is perceived and how it can be twisted. And of course I read a lot about parallel world theory, because I didn't want to sound like a complete idiot when writing about it, having characters talk about it. So, yeah, I think you have to, any sci-fi book you write, you really have to do a little bit of research into it, but you should never let it crowd your own imagination. I mean, you have to know the rules before you break them, but you just have a lot of fun breaking them. So, and, what's your favorite comic? Clara asks, and X-Men hands down. I always preferred the Marvel comics over DC comics, and out of all of them, I always preferred the X-Men because they weren't traditional superheroes. They were always kind of outcasts, and they weren't always appreciated for the things that they did. And they were just a great example of a group of mostly functional but slightly dysfunctional people thrown together into chaotic circumstances, which, if you read my series, that's what it's all about. And X-Men captured that better than anything else, and I thought the powers are pretty cool too. So, let's see. Johnny asks, where do you draw inspiration from, and what do you do to get over writer's block, or do you not suffer from it? Oh, no, Johnny, I get it. I think every writer has it at some point or another, and it's hard to... There could be 1,000 different causes. I mean, I had a death in the family a couple months ago, and that screwed me up for a while, of course, because you can't really... Writing fiction takes a lot of focus. And if you can't get to that place where you're really, tapping into the characters, then you're going to be stymied. Sometimes you can get choked up by just doubt. I think every writer in every book, you get to the point where you read something and like, oh God, this isn't working, or oh no, I'm stuck. Sometimes it just takes stepping away for a little while. Writer's block never lasts, and if you have it, you have to really kind of delve into yourself and see where the problem is. At one point when I was writing Flight of the Silvers, the first book of my series, I was stuck for about 6 weeks where I could not move forward. And it turned out it was just a really minor thing in the plot that was like tripping me up. And I didn't even know it. So all I had to do was just go back a little bit, fix it, and I was ready to move forward. I write completely linear. I'm not the kind of writer who can just like write a little bit at the end and the beginning and jump around the middle. I have to go from the beginning to the end or I am lost. So, but every time I get stuck, it's just a matter of asking myself, okay, what is it that's stopping me this time? And it works. So, Clary asks, do you have advice for students who want to write but struggle to stick to one story? Amazingly, that has never been my issue. I get obsessive about single stories, and it pushes out everything else in my head, including all the things I need to do in real life. I just think about it all the time. I've had the Silver series stuck in my head for 8 or 9 years before I finally sat down and write it, but I'd never ever stopped thinking about it. So it was kind of crazy that way. But I do know I have a lot of writer friends who just have tons of different ideas spilling around in their heads. I know already I'm working on the 3rd book of the Silver series, and I start getting inklings of my next book after that, and I have to push it away, or else I'll be thinking about it exclusively. So I think it's just, you have to really... Sometimes too much of a good thing can be too much. When you have too many ideas, sometimes you have to just push them out of your head and focus on the one that just gives you the most passion, or the one that you're really ready to write, is my advice. And do you like Harry Potter? Oh, of course I do. I did not... I was a latecomer to the series. I'm not very big on young adult literature. When I started hearing about names like Dumbledore and all this other stuff, I'm just like, it's probably not for me. But friends insisted, and the first 3 books I enjoyed very much. Her writing style is fantastic. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's just enough to get you into the scene. But it wasn't until Goblet of Fire that I was just as hooked as everybody else. I was like, I would have sold my kidney for a sneak peek of the next book at that point. She just has this way of sucking you into the story, and between the characters and the world building and just the pacing of it, yeah, she honestly is one of my inspirations for the Flight of the Silver. She convinced me, that okay, I can write a series, and just more power to her. And I love the fact that she's doing different stuff, that she's writing mysteries under a different name, and she just doesn't stick to what works for her. I just have so much respect for her, and envy at her success. But which is my favorite Harry Potter book, Neil asks? No question, Order of the Phoenix. That was the one where I truly... With the other books, I had a slight inkling of what was going to happen. You could see the threads and where it was going. With Order of the Phoenix, everything went off the rails at Hogwarts, and I had honestly had no idea what was going to happen with it. And I also like the fact that a lot of the threat came from something other than Voldemort. I mean, as much as I love the series, come on, let's face facts, Voldemort was not the most competent of villains. He could be a little convoluted at times, and he was just... the fact that he kept getting stymied by how to kill Harry Potter, or it was... for somebody that powerful, of course, he had to be, or else, the series would only last 20 pages before he killed Harry. But there were some times he wasn't the most compelling part of the series for me. So when you had Dolores Umbridge and the Ministry of Magic kind of turning the whole school upside down, I was absolutely hooked. And the movie captured that perfectly too. But if I had to reread Harry Potter, I'd probably start with book 5, because it's also the longest one in the series. So I love, as you can see, I'll show it to you again. I love long books. So, let's see. Is there any genre you would attempt? I will go anywhere a story takes me. If there is a story burning a hole in my head, I don't care if it is a sci-fi, a mystery, or a gay western, I don't know. Anything, I will follow it. The genre doesn't intimidate me too much, except for maybe young adults. That one has different expectations to it that don't entirely mesh with my writing style. I'm big on curses and darker stuff. I guess there's some dark YA out there, but that's probably the one that I would steer clear of personally, though Lord knows there are very, very good ones like J.K. Rowling. So, how do you structure writing your books? Do you start with a character or an ending? That's a very good question, and it's been so long since I started drafting the Silver series that I don't even remember which came first. I'm pretty sure I knew I had an ending. I mean, I knew how the whole series would end before I even wrote the first page, and I knew how it would begin. Everything in between that was a blur, so I had to start it to really get a better sense of where it was going. I mean, I had a rough outline, but it's a very complicated story, so this is why the first book took me 4 years to write, and the second one took me 3 years to write. I'm not the world's quickest writer. No George R.R. Martin on the slowness scale, but I'm close. So, are you a gardener or an architect? That's, in terms of, oh, okay, sorry, I'm not fully caffeinated yet, so I'm not processing questions, but architect, I structure the hell out of my stories, and I kind of go with it from there. So, next question. Did you go to university, and if so, what did you study? Yes, I went to Colby College in Waterville, Maine, and my major was, if I could have majored in creative writing, I would have, but they didn't offer it. I majored in American Studies, which is a combination of American history and literature, and that was a lot of fun, actually. If I had to do it all over again, I would pick that one a second time, because it had all the best classes. So, I'm looking for more questions now. Oh, somebody mentions Brandon Sanderson as an example of a good writer. He is. I like him. I read the Mistborn books, and I thought they were really imaginative, and I loved his use of metal-based magic. I thought that was really, really creative, and it made the whole action scenes a lot more fun. So, question from Jen. Was there a certain period of American history you liked? Yes. I love the early 20th century. One of the things that I do in The Flight of the Silvers, my alternate world, is just like ours until 1912, where something cataclysmic happens that changes the entire course of society and history. And I had a lot of fun kind of retracing my steps along the 20th century to see how things would change, and what would be different here, what would stay the same, more or less. And I got to basically rewrite 90 years of the 20th century, which was so much fun. It's like World War I didn't happen, Prohibition went a little bit differently. It was just an absolute blast. It took my all my knowledge of history, which it's not great, but it's still good to kind of rewrite it. And that was probably one of the most fun parts of writing this series, is to mess with history that way. So, what advice would you give to a young writer? The most hypocritical advice ever. Keep reading. Read as much as you can. It's hypocritical now because my schedule's so crazy, I don't get to do nearly as much reading as I want to do. But I really, really should, because it always helps me. Even reading a not-so-good book can be inspiring, because there's always something good about it, and in the worst case, it can be a great roadmap about what not to do. So it's always useful, and I'm determined to do more of that. So, if someone wanted to become a writer, are there any things you would advise them to do that may help them become more successful? Biggest thing is to find a good agent. It is, unless you go the self-published route, if you want a traditional publishing deal, it is almost impossible. Not entirely impossible, but really, really, really hard to do that without a dedicated agent. I've had the same guy representing me now for 18 years, and he is just a whirlwind. He's actually a Hollywood agent. He started out because I was a screenwriter before I tackled novels, but when I wanted to move into books, he moved with me, and he's done an amazing job. He managed to sell Flight of the Silvers in this first round of submissions, which I never expected. So I couldn't do it on my own. And even if I could, I'm a horrible negotiator. If the publisher had offered, to pay me in bricks and fish, I would have accepted it. So thank God I have an agent, or else I'd be living in bricks and fish. So, and to find a good agent, a lot of times you'll need some external source of credit. Like if there are writing contests that you do fairly well in, like quarterfinals or something, that it always helps in a query letter. That's how I got my agent. My screenplay did pretty well in some contests. I used that as some bragging rights, and it helped open a door for me. So, and otherwise, just keep writing, keep working on your craft, and just never stop. That's the biggest, I know it's cliche, but it's the biggest, best advice that I can give. So, very good question. How did writing as a screenwriter influence how you write books? Screenplays are so much different in that you only have about roughly 120 pages to tell your whole story. And so in many ways, it taught me how to be. It's funny to say that I'm an economical writer when my books are like 600, 700 pages, but I still like to get to the meat of every scene. I jump right into it. I don't waste, or I don't spend 4 or 5 pages describing a tree or a sunset. Certain books, I don't begrudge the writers who do that, but I like to keep the plot moving, and that's definitely something screenwriting taught me. It also sharpened my ear for dialogue. Screenplays live and die by the strength of the dialogue, much more than books do. So that definitely helped me on that front. So I think George R.R. Martin also got his roots. Oh yeah, he did a lot of TV writing before it became huge. I mean, he dabbled in every genre. He did comic books, novellas. It definitely, you can in many ways see the influence in Game of Thrones, another book series that I absolutely love, and a TV series. But his books, as long as they are also very economical. He really, he knows how to just paint a very visual picture with his words. So they're not super literary, but they're definitely evocative. So, and someone asked, is the screenwriting industry as ruthless as they say? Depends what they say. I found people were very nice, but it was also very, very volatile. The first time I actually got paid as a screenwriter, the film production company optioned my script, and I was so happy to get my first check, and I thought this is just the beginning, and then the whole company folded like a month later. So it's a lot more mercurial than the book industry. So once I moved into fiction, it felt a little bit better. Not that the book industry isn't volatile too. The imprint of Penguin that first published Flight of the Silvers just got closed this year. So now my books are moving from Blue Rider Press to Dutton because of the big transition. And everybody who I worked with on Flight of the Silvers is either in a different division of Penguin or has left the company. So it's these are crazy industries, and it's hard to keep up with. But luckily I got my book 3 that I'm working on now, and I'll get to finish the series. So, thank God. So, what TV show is my favorite? I love the really big, brooding, complex dramas like Game of Thrones, but Westworld blew me away in terms of just the visuals and the storytelling. It's probably one of my favorite shows of the last couple of years. Breaking Bad was another one that, as a writer, I just absolutely in awe of. I mean, it was just a perfectly plotted series. And when you learn about the behind the scenes of that show and how crazy everything was and how they had to make stuff up on the fly, it's amazing that they managed to tell such a perfect story as they did. I could rewatch that one. I could binge watch that one every year, Breaking Bad. And what TV show has the best dialogue? Oh, that's a hard one. You'll definitely find those more on the high-quality cable shows that I think they just have a better... It sounds snobby, but I can't... There's very few broadcast TV shows I can watch anymore, like network shows. They just... something about them, I don't know. So, the show, I thought Westworld had great dialogue, and there was anything Aaron Sorkin writes. I'm not the world's biggest fan of him, but West Wing, The Newsroom, I could just sit and listen to that dialogue for hours. That's the one. His main strength is dialogue. He is so freaking good at it. There are some people who are like Quentin Tarantino, in the film world, who even when I don't like his movies, I could just sit and listen to the dialogue because he's so freaking good at it. So, what's my favorite film? I have several, some classics. Besides Star Wars, of course. That's such a cliche answer, but my God, I grew up with this. I was just the right age for it. So, and I'm talking about, of course, the original trilogy, not the prequels. I did enjoy Force Awakens, and of course I am going to see the new one very, very soon, hopefully, when I can carve out the time. I enjoyed, there's this 1976 movie called Network. It's a classic media satire that was just besides being an absolutely amazing movie, it was one of the most prescient films. In 1976, this movie predicted reality shows and the complete commodization of TV news. It was decades ahead of its time and very, very sharply written. If you have the chance to rent that movie, Network, and it's a very, very American satire, but it is just done absolutely beautifully. Another movie that I absolutely love is City of God that came out in 2002, I believe, Brazilian film that had one of the most intricate plot structures I've ever seen in a movie. It was like reading a really good 600-page novel, but somehow they condensed it into a 2-hour movie, and I thought it was brilliantly done. So, someone mentioned, I love the Lord of the Rings movies. Speaking of good adaptations, was a perfect example of taking some really complex material, boiling it down to its essence, and turning it into a good story. I think if they had adapted that series like page by page, it would have been not as good as it was. I was pretty amazed by that. And I know Amazon is talking about rebooting that series or doing another, like a Middle-earth based series, and I don't have high hopes for it. So, new question. Do you get inspiration, use real-world geopolitical issues in your books? A little bit, yeah. I try not to get too pointed in commentary because I think in certain types of stories, it can pull readers out of the story. Once they see that you are preaching or politicizing, I think it kind of distracts from the stuff that's going on. And for me, it's the characters and story that come first. But definitely influenced subtly by things that are going on. This alternate America that I write about in the Silver series is because something tragic happened in 1912. It's like, think of 9/11 times a million. The country essentially closed their borders in 1912 and become as anti-immigrant as you can possibly imagine. And I was writing this before current events, so kind of life imitated art in that respect. So now when I'm writing about this world, I get to throw in a few pot shots into things that are going on. I'm a bleeding heart liberal, and I am not happy with many things that are going on here. So I think it's impossible not to be political, but like I said, I also try not to show my hand too much when it comes to that, because the story comes first. So, so did readers notice the link? Some did, and they were okay with it, and it was, like I said, because I covered my tracks a little bit and I didn't go too crazy, I didn't get a lot of backlash, so that's always good. But if you look at Amazon, you'll see anything. There's always a negative review saying, oh, this book is too liberal, too conservative, People are politicizing everything now, even the things that aren't meant to be political. So that is just the environment we live in now. So, and why do you think dystopian fiction has become so popular in recent years? When I say that's a very good question, I mean, I ask that all the time, because I think it's finally on the wane, because people are getting, it's been overplayed. You know how vampire novels were all the rage during the Twilight years, and they kind of overplayed their hands. But certain things like now, like dystopian, zombie, I think they're finally kind of on their way out. Especially with dystopian, I think we're living so much of it now that we kind of don't want to read it. We want something that's an escape from the world around us. So I've never personally believed in dystopian or utopian stories. I think any world is going to be a mixture of both. I mean, it's never all good or all bad. So when people ask me if my books are dystopian, you're utopian, I just say it's just utopia in my world. So, but I definitely will gravitate towards the books that are more optimistic. I'm reading one now called All Our Wrong Todays by Elon Matsai. I think I'm pronouncing his name wrong. But it's a very popular book now and very optimistic, basically. It's about two different futures. Well, it's about our world and a different world, but the alternate world is the utopia and our world is the dystopia. So it's an interesting spin, but I like it. So All Our Wrongs Today was probably my favorite read of the last 6 months. And you can see, sorry, I'm still reading some new questions here. I think you start to see some more optimism in TV and movies too. I mean, I think now more than ever we're going to need escapist fiction, because it's when things get bad, you want to sometimes just break away from it. I get enough horror from the news. So, any more questions? We seem to have a little bit of a lull. Wait, one's coming, maybe. I've never done this format before. It is really, really interesting. I kind of like it. The last thing I did on this was a video podcast, so this is a nice departure in a way. But if there are no other questions, then someone asked tea or coffee, and my answer. I cannot. I get my caffeine just from soda, so it's probably a very American thing. I don't know, but if you put me in a tank of Diet Pepsi at this point, I could probably breathe. I consume way too much of it. What would be your next goal in terms of writing? Like another series? No, very good question. after the Silver Trilogy is done, I'm going to write a one-off book. I mean, as much as it is very, very fun to write series, but they are demanding in ways that singular books are not. So I would definitely want to mix it up a little bit. And so whatever my next book will be, and I have two different ideas right now that are kind of competing for my attention, but it's going to, one thing I know for sure, that it's just going to be a one and done. So, and then again, I'll probably do a series after that, but I'll mix it up a little bit. So I think that is it. Thank you so much for your great questions. And thank you, Jen and Campus Society, for having me. I was struggling a little bit with the format, but I think this was fantastic. So you can visit my website at danielprice.info to learn more about me, and you can contact me anytime. I'm on Twitter. Just Silver's Guy is my handle there. And if you have any questions for me, ask me anytime. And yes, thank you very much for watching and listening. So I'm going to log off and wish you all a good day. Thank you.